What's the right way to commemorate a really violent thing that brought about good results? Kind of an interesting question, isn't it? And I've been thinking about that for the last few days as we're getting here into the epilogue of the book of Esther. We're into the white letters on black screen phase. Esther 9 up through verse 19 still has quite a bit of drama and everything. But verse 19 is about where it all wraps up. The characters are all where we're going to leave them. And the arcs, the narrative arcs, the character arcs that have been established throughout the book, they're all resolved. And then when we get into verse 20, it's like we've faded to black and some beautiful stringed instrument music begins to play and you're feeling things and you're reflecting on the story, but you're still curious about how things play out, what happened to everybody. And then the white letters slowly fade over the top of the black and they fade in. Now you can see them. You read the whole thing as the music continues to play and you're like, oh, okay, that's kind of how it all wrapped up. And what you're really getting there with those white letters on the black screen that we see in Esther 9:20 and forward is the response, a celebratory response even, to a really violent episode, a quick little 2-day mini war that got fought in the middle of the Achaemenid Empire that didn't involve the Persian army. It was a strange little scheduled civil war almost. Like, hey, we're just going to settle out some age-old ethnic dispute that has existed for evers and evers instead of letting it just bleed on forever. Stuff's been set in motion, and we're just going to settle it out. That's more or less how it's going to look to an outsider. And it was violent, as we've discussed. A lot of people died. 75,000 people is our starting number. I think it was probably a lot more than that when you consider all the sides and women, children, the collateral damage, all the things that happened with war. But you got 2 days of violence, and then it's over, and the epilogue sort of tells us how to feel about it. It certainly tells us how the original audience felt about it, and how they felt was euphoric, absolutely elated at how this thing worked out. And I've been looking over the first words of this white letter on black screen section that we started talking about yesterday, and I think I'm getting closer in my brain to the heart of what this celebration was. It's right here. I'm just going to read you the whole thing. It says, verse 20, Esther 9, Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout the provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy, and their mourning into a day of celebration. It's the pivot. It's the reversal. That is what is causing the euphoria. Because it looked like they were dead to rights. It looked like they weren't even going to be allowed to fight back. And then this whole awful, bitter situation pivots. The tables are turned and they're delivered and they win. And so the euphoria here is a result of people who not very long ago were fully gaming out all day long, when their heads are on their pillows, when they're talking with their kids. They're just gaming out their own mortality, not even as individuals, but as their entire culture, because they can see the train coming down the tracks from months away, and they're having to mentally contend with the idea that this is it for them. Now, when you or I face the end, when we face our own mortality, generally speaking, we face that with some solace in mind that things we're a part of, the groups we're a part of, the story that we're a part of, a family that we're a part of will persist. Your kids will live on. The things you've built and invested in will live on. These people were having to contend with the idea that all of that would go away and that there would be nothing left. And not just they, but everything about them external to them would also die in one day that was scheduled on the calendar. And then, crazily, because of one sleepless night for the king, there's this pivot that happens. And it's not just human psychology that tells me that that's why the euphoria occurred, and that's why there's this celebration of a very violent episode. But explicitly, Mordecai sends out this letter and is like, hey, let me draw your attention again to how dead we were and now how alive we are. It's a lot like Luke 15, right? It's okay if you don't know what Luke 15 is. This is one of Jesus' super famous parables about a son, well, really two sons, and they got a good dad with a big estate, and the one son is tired of waiting around for his dad to die, and so he's like, give me my inheritance now, basically. I wish you were dead. Give me your money now, whatever I'm entitled to. And he goes and he burns it on stupid stuff, and his life is in ruins, and then it occurs to him, like, I'm living worse than my dad's servants. I should just go back and try to beg back in as a slave or a servant. And he goes back, and his dad, he doesn't even let the kid get the speech out. He just receives him, and the dad famously says, this son of mine was dead, and now he's alive again. And this is a theme that appears in a lot more places than just Esther and that one parable from Jesus. I mean, death to life, this reversal, it's all over the Bible. I mean, it's as close to the central theme as you can get, really. And so Mordecai pointing to that is a way of reminding the people who are celebrating this that it isn't just a win, but it's a win against the backdrop of complete and total death and annihilation and hopelessness. You were there a second ago, totally dead in your situation, and now, implicitly, thanks to the providence of God, but now celebrate euphorically that you are no longer in that position. You have been made alive. You were effectively dead, and now you're completely alive. And that reversal is what you're supposed to get hyped about. And really, I think that's the same reversal that Christians, followers of Jesus, who we'll meet in about that many pages. I mean, that's the same thing that Christians have celebrated for 2,000 years. I was dead and I was made alive. I was dead in my transgressions, and Christ did the work to resolve that. I mean, it's a beautiful story. And it's like we get a little tiny nugget of that right here in what Mordecai is proposing that people celebrate. So, look, if it's not obvious, I don't write this podcast a whole season in advance. I think it's just impossible. It's not the point of the exercise. It's not what we're doing here. We work on it together. And it might at times seem like I kind of have a real clear map for all of this, and I am descending from some imagined mountain of knowledge and that I've solved the Bible. I have not. I have learned so much. I have changed. I am growing in real time. I'm learning stuff in real time. I'm reading books and searching things in real time, and I'm reacting to the story in real time. And the last couple of weeks, I'm not going to lie, it's been pretty tough for me to turn on the microphone and go and tackle the material on the page in Esther 8 and Esther 9, while certain things that are going on in the world as I'm recording this are unfolding. Look, I don't know when you're going to listen to it, so I'm going to keep this a little bit evergreen, but there's stuff going on as I'm recording this that is directly descended from the crisis on the page in Esther, that is directly descended from the crisis on the page during the reign of King Saul 600 years earlier, that is directly descended from the crisis on the page when the Israelites get out of Egypt and they're wandering around in the desert and they get attacked by the Amalekites. It's just impossible not to see the connections. And it's impossible to ignore the reality that while most of the things I encounter as a Westerner in the world are just very recent, they're the product of new tensions and new pressures, stuff we haven't really explored yet, new technology, things like that. Most stuff is very novel. But this stuff that's been in the news and this stuff we're reading about in Esther, it is not novel. It is a very, very old phenomenon. It's an old tension. It's an ancient fight from before ghosts were ghosts, so far back that it's hard to even know how to properly account for it, and it's really hard to process it in real time as I'm looking at the material on the page that relates so closely to it. But here's the thing. In my lifetime, war, or art rather, that depicts war and violence has been overwhelmingly absurdist in tone. You watch it and it's meant to make the viewer feel like this is insane. Like, why do people do this to each other? And, well, especially when you're making movies about wars that have nothing to do with anything other than powerful elites doing dumb stuff and fighting for stupid reasons, it becomes really easy to go along with the filmmaker and be like, yeah, I've seen a lot of war in my lifetime too that doesn't really make a lot of sense. Or you get sold a bill of good as a populist. Everybody's like, let's have a war. And then it turns out that, like most things, eventually there's a retraction printed on page 85 of the newspaper way after it would affect anything and after the damage is already done. And so, look, I'm very sympathetic to the artistic framework that suggests that war is often really stupid and war often could have been avoided, and there's an absurdity to how war often plays out. I get it. But I think when I come to this text, I have to acknowledge that set of interpretive lenses, I wear that. And yet there's another set of interpretive lenses when it comes to war historically, and that is the unapologetically celebratory set of lenses. The ones that say, no, we won. We were supposed to lose. It's amazing that we won. Let there be unending joy and let us never forget this victory. Was blood shed? Yep. Was it a pretty tough time for everybody? Sure was. But we came through the other side and we averted our own destruction, and we're going to celebrate it, and we're not going to apologize for that. Mordecai looks at this and says, we're going to celebrate this, and we're going to celebrate it enthusiastically. And I am grateful for the insight that he demonstrates in specifically saying, note and celebrate that this is the month when our sorrow was turned into joy and our mourning was turned into a day of celebration. I'm Matt. This is a 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.